I was definitely the youngest, and we were the guinea pig class. And to be honest, it was not easy to graduate with that degree because I had no idea how the heck it would influence my professional life. But I knew it would impact my personal life. And back then, in 2005, employee engagement was still something new that we were talking about. So if you ask a lot of us who are the guinea pigs, we didn't even use the terms positive psychology or happiness at work for quite a while. And it's just been incredible to see the surge in interest in positive psychology, particularly over this past year. Right? Before COVID, the US well-being industry was estimated to be about $8 billion. But of course, now we see that this interest and investment has even increased. And I just want to share a little bit about my work as we think about how we redesign our programs for this time in which work is quite uncertain. So I'm going to share a little bit of the research that has inspired me and how I'm folding that into my practice as a leadership development consultant, trainer, and executive coach. So just briefly, what I'll touch on are 3 research insights that have really impacted my current practice, 2 practices I'd like to share with you, and 1 question for all of us on well-being as a team sport. Sound okay? I can see a few videos, so thanks, Julia and Sarah. So just to talk a little bit about best practice. So even when I was in MAPP, these were the best practices that point to a continuum of mental health, right? We tend to look at a continuum of mental illness to positive mental health and well-being. And this is one of the most used scales, the Cantrell ladder, for studying well-being. You see it in McKinsey and Deloitte's research all of the time. Gallup has also been tracking well-being using this ladder. It is quick for sure, but I find it to be a very unhelpful diagnostic or developmental tool in the workplace because it doesn't give any indication of what to do to enhance or to sustain thriving. For example, if my employee average is 4 on the ladder, what do? So my call is to embrace a little bit more complexity over simplification. The constructs of mental illness and mental health are not bipolar opposites, as we sometimes see in the literature, right? It's not just severe mental illness to really thriving. So this is one really important aspect of research where now I look instead at the dual factor model of well-being from Corey Keyes. This looks at mental illness and well-being or positive mental health as reflected on 2 distinct continua rather than the extreme ends of a single spectrum. So we see mental health as both positive well-being and positive mental functioning. So the first continua, the x-axis, is mental illness or struggling from present to absent. The second continua, the y-axis, is well-being and thriving from high to low. This means that people can experience well-being even with mental illness. And you can also have poor well-being without mental illness. Right? We've known this. The absence of psychopathology does not imply we have sound mental health unless we also have a high state of psychological well-being. And this aligns with the World Health Organization's definition of mental health as a state of well-being. So I use this because it shows us that complete mental health is that flourishing or thriving state. And I sometimes rename these a little bit as looking at folks who are really struggling, those who are getting by or languishing, right? These are people without a mental illness that can still experience low levels of well-being. And you might have seen Adam Grant's popular article a few months ago really talking about this word of languishing. Right? These are people who have a lack of PERMA, if you will. But we also have those who are living well, even thriving, despite the struggle of mental illness. And I think in the workplace, these are overlooked, this group. Through the pandemic, mental illness has lost some of its stigma, right? It's okay not to be okay. So we're normalizing a little bit more living with depression and anxiety. But I think this is a category of living well despite struggle that we don't pay enough attention to. And then, of course, we have that state of flourishing. So this addresses things we know, that just focusing on treatment and prevention of mental illness has not succeeded in reducing the prevalence of mental illness in past decades, that high levels of positive well-being can protect individuals from mental illness, that you can be doing well despite having mental illness, and that languishing or having low well-being does not mean you have mental ill health or psychopathology. Most importantly, though, when I look at this and when I introduce folks to this, we see that access to well-being is open to everyone. So really changing how we measure using a dual factor continuum like this changes how we're going to intervene and how we speak about it. So for me, it's been a complete mind shift in how I speak about well-being, because we can think about what the different individuals within each group might require, respond to, or benefit from when it comes to different interventions. Make sense? And it goes back to what Chris Peterson taught me in 2005, was that thriving people struggle well. And that still really holds today. The second piece of research I really want everyone to know about is this one, a meta-analysis of positive workplace interventions from Donaldson and Donaldson in 2019. This was the first meta-analysis of positive psychology interventions at work, looking at interventions that explicitly utilize the theory and scholarship of positive work in organizations to guide, plan, design, and implement the intervention under consideration. So it was asking what makes for an impactful positive psychology intervention in the workplace. And I think this is so important. The great news is we know that positive psychology interventions work. So they do improve positive, desirable work outcomes like performance, job well-being, and engagement. And it's also really exciting because it's even shown that they can reduce some negative or undesirable work outcomes, like negative job well-being, such as stress and emotional exhaustion. So I think this is just really exciting research that I keep coming back to when it comes towards targeting the positive interventions that I'm explaining or suggesting to use in the workplace. And then the third piece of research that I found really insightful lately is, of course, all the amazing research coming out during COVID. I've put bullets on the bottom left to the 3 studies during COVID that I've really been focusing on. Of course, the overarching finding has been the importance of social connection for well-being. We knew this before, but it's really been underlined this past year. We know that individuals can endure high levels of distress during this pandemic, yet still experience positive mental health. And a lot of that looks at these studies. I really love, for example, Lee's study. They did an analysis of word use on social media in China immediately before and soon after COVID emerged, showing that even with an increase in anxiety and depression, happiness and life satisfaction are still present, albeit reduced, right? So that living well despite struggle, perhaps, or even the languishing quadrant. And it's also looked at protective and risk factors for well-being. So what we've seen from a lot of these studies that I would summarize from Lee Waters and her group study is that when it comes to mental health and high well-being, that there are 3 different types of interactions: buffering, bolstering, and building. A buffering effect occurs when positive emotions, processes, conditions, or relationships serve to diminish or to stave off psychological ill health during the crisis, right? So they're buffering against depression, anxiety, work stress. We can also have a bolstering effect of positive psychology when positive emotions, processes, or relationships maintain our mental health despite the crisis. Right? So these are things like bolstering our well-being, our energy, our connectedness. And then the building effect is when an individual can use the crisis in a transformative way to develop new practices like greater strengths use or more self-compassion or an enhanced sense of meaning despite struggle, right? This helps to build resilience, coping, and collective capacity. And this has such important implications for our work. And this, you all know this research, but I just want to share a snapshot of the reality of the hopes and the fears about well-being at work. People are hoping for better work-life balance, but they're also fearing that it's going to get worse. People are hoping for increased focus on well-being. Sorry, the second point should be fearing for worse focus on well-being. and work-life balance. People are also feeling a sense of loss. We know this. A lot of folks within their work teams have felt closer, but across the organization, even more siloed. And I'm seeing that less employees are flourishing. We know this from the Deloitte research. Many are feeling that their organizations don't care about their well-being, and that burnout was a top challenge even before the pandemic. So again, these are just the things that my clients are concerned about, and for which I'm responding with the idea that well-being is a team sport. I think we really need to focus on team-based interventions to strengthen those workplace connections, which are the critical ingredient to well-being during this time. So I'm going to just share with you two of my practices, and then I'll pause for any questions. The first one is an age-old, amazing practice of mentoring, which I've brought to a group mentoring scale. So actually using one mentor with several mentees. This is really amazing to use in tech, where we have kind of less female talent at the top available as mentors. So I've particularly been working with Glovo. They're the largest startup in Southern Europe. They're a courier service, and they've had a lack of representation in women's roles and gaps for career development. So we've done a 6-month global virtual mentoring program. We launched at the beginning of the pandemic last year, and we launched again this year. And it's a combination of group mentoring, training, peer support, like any great mentoring program, but with that group aspect, which is entirely different. It's not a one-on-one relationship. It's a 1 to 3 relationship where we're building connections across the organization. And what I've seen from the research that I'm doing is that it's helping to buffer against work stress, it's bolstering connections, and it's building stronger leadership resilience. Okay, so that's the first practice. And then the second one that I'm knee deep in, that I'm having so much fun with, is a project with Vistaprint. So they have a data and analytics organization that has increased 70% last year and 50% the year before. And they want to improve the well-being across their organization. And they see that leaders are responsible for both performance and well-being of their teams now. And I'm sure you've all seen this. As I mentioned before, depression has been skyrocketing for a while. There's been no change in work engagement for 3 decades. And so strengthening connections, I really believe, is as important as shaping culture and managing people when you're a leader. So how do we take in this inclusive connection mindset to engineer high quality connections across our teams, right? So but I do think it's not only a leadership responsibility, it is a team sport, because you can't yoga or meditate your way out of burnout. And burnout fixes vary from organization to organization and from team to team, right? Preventing burnout isn't about individual only strategies. We need more of a systems-based intervention, and I see teams as mini systems. So as I mentioned, Vistaprint's DNA organization has been going through rapid growth. They've been watching workload in their engagement tool of Peakon, and they've set an OKR to actually help employees with well-being. So this is what we're doing. We're building well-being through teams, which actually defining the teams themselves has been quite a challenge with this project. We're making sure that leaders have that inclusive connection mindset. They know what it means to build high quality connections and high psychological safety on their teams. And we're focusing on different measures. So the first one is on workload, thriving, and burnout. So we have a burnout scale. This is a 1-item self-scoring scale on people's subjective definition of what burnout means to them. So this gives us a bit of information, but I don't find this a helpful tool for the leaders, right? We need to embrace a little bit more of that complexity. So what I'm also doing is looking at workload and thriving. So you'll see here on the x-axis, I've measured people's level of thriving. Here I'm using a simple thriving at work scale. It's 3 things. Do I feel as I'm growing, learning, and am I energized? And then we're looking at workload. Is it manageable or am I overwhelmed? So for example, this is the leadership team. How interesting is this? These categories of sprinting, sustainable, burnout risk are mine. These are not, this is not a scientific tool, but this is how we're interpreting the data. It's super interesting to see that this leadership team is thriving through this growth, but very much in the sprinting category. They know this. And we know that the folks in that sprinting category, that is a shortcut to burnout, right? You probably know the research that folks that are highly engaged, high achievers have a higher risk of burnout than your average employee. So it's really important to be keeping an eye on these folks. So this is one aspect that we're looking at where we do a team survey. And again, employee engagement and satisfaction is not a proxy for well-being. So I think you really need to look at it from a variety of measures. The second thing we're looking at is work well-being factors. So this is pulling from the job demands resources theory to help people identify the well-being factors that matter most to them, and then to think about the imbalance. So this is just a quick scale, a visual of how I'm doing that. I'm looking at, I think it's 13 well-being factors. We know that 6 of those are extreme risk factors for burnout, like having a sense of control and autonomy, a manageable workload, a sense of fairness and values. And so this is helping a team to see at a glance where they're at, but then at an individual level to understand, for me right now, what are the well-being factors that matter most? And by helping managers and leaders understand the different well-being factors, they can have candid conversations about what's your perceived level of decision authority? How much autonomy are my team members feeling? Do they have a sense of role clarity? So it's giving a team common language and some actionable strategies. And the last way we're doing that is really making a team-based sport is looking at 10 team resilience competencies. So they'll have a scale that looks like this, and it measures things from a sense of trust to being on this team is energizing to we have the skills to have challenging conversations. And then in the workshop, I'm kind of doing some team coaching based on where they're at to pick one of these team competencies and to look at it as a skill. And how can we build this skill as a team over the next quarter? And it's been very interesting. One team has focused on how to improve their continuous learning. Another team has focused on how to have better challenging conversations and give more critical feedback. And it helps the team to see that supporting one another in their well-being and resilience is something that they can control and that they can move the needle on. And we're just at the beginning of this. So I think we've done about 5 teams out of almost 25. So we're in the piloting stages of this project, but it's been really exciting because now that we're gathering more of this data, we can step back and you can start looking at different teams. So for example, these are 2 different teams. It's so interesting to look. You've got, for the team on the right, team B, you've got some folks that are languishing, perhaps even struggling. You've got a lot of variance in terms of how people feel about their team's resilience competencies. Right? The bars represent the high and lows from the team's feedback. So this is really going to help to look at overall, what is our well-being strategy? For example, if we're seeing that across teams, people don't feel as though they have decision authority, let's pinpoint that. What can we celebrate in terms of what's going well for our well-being? So it's really helping to change the dialogue. As I mentioned, it's giving folks a common language, some actionable strategies, because we know that languishing is very much a helplessness issue. Marty actually explained this to us. We had a MAPP gathering, and he was saying that languishing is about helplessness. You have to find what works and where you have agency in your life to build that purpose and meaning and mastery. And that's what I'm trying to do in these well-being skills labs with teams. So that's where I'm at. That's the research that's really inspiring me. These are 2 of the practices that I'm currently spending a lot of time on. But I think that particularly for this group of positive psychology practitioners, as we facilitate helping and supporting one another through well-being, there's no community better suited for carrying out the idea of well-being as a team sport. So I'd love to just pause if any other folks have examples of how they're doing this with their teams or any questions for me. Happy to do that too.
Thank you. Yeah, if any questions, now is your moment. I will stop you when your moment is over, so feel free. I'll interrupt happily.
Hi, Giselle. Thank you. That was so interesting. You said about keeping an eye on highly engaged, high achievers. How would you do that? How would you mitigate the risk there?
Oh, great question. What we're asking the leaders to do is, after these labs, to have one-on-one check-in conversations during their normally scheduled touch points. So to come back to the lab and say, hey, which are the well-being factors that are really most important to you right now? And to try to understand what they need to continually build with this person, but what might they need to build or bolster. There might be, for example, some of these folks are feeling a lack of fairness in terms of how decisions are made and roles, promotions are given. So there's opportunities for the leaders to focus on that. So to be determined, Juliet, I hopefully will have more of an understanding. At this moment, though, I'm not being prescriptive with the leaders. I'm not saying, just because someone is in the sprinting category that they are necessarily at risk for burnout. I'm saying they could be. And here are the well-being factors to look at, and I encourage you to have a conversation about it. It's always the case that people come into these workshops and they're like, tell me exactly what to focus on. But we all know we can't do that. There's no magic fix to this, and the well-being factors really do vary across teams and across individuals. So I'm just trying to equip the leaders with tools and language to have a conversation. Yeah, it's a great question.
That's really interesting. Thanks. And that importance of, not being too prescriptive and being flexible in the way, we're applying the knowledge and the tools and seeking to adapt. I think it links into some of the things Ilona was talking about as well. As we have ideas, we have these amazing tools, and sometimes we're tempted to just go and apply them when that might not be the sort of actual need on the field. That's fascinating. Thank you for that. Is there one last question anyone wants to ask?
Sarah, are you raising your hand?
Yes, thank you.
Sarah,
It was more of a comment really to say, and I'm sure you do this, but kind of building on some of the positive psychology interventions that you used with these teams. I'm thinking about things like Scott Crabtree's Happiness at Work game, which introduces lots of small little things you can do when faced with common workplace challenges, and it to come at them from a positive perspective. And all the interventions suggested are based on positive psychology research. So for introducing some of the research in a really easy way to help people who are thinking about how can we create a more positive culture in our team or in our leadership team, I found that to be a particularly useful tool. Along, of course, with the sort of group dynamic ones like appreciative inquiry and so on that are very much about building on the best. So I'm sure you use those as well. I just wanted to bring them into the discussion. So, because there's so many different ways we can come at this.
Yeah, yes, I actually helped Scott in his game. So I'm a big fan of that. And I know Michelle's on the line too. So how we bring in well-being cards or discussion prompts, that's a great idea. And even helping this team as they go through it, because each lab, we're gathering each team's best practices. Some teams are off the charts in some of these areas. So we're gathering some of their practices that we could use as conversation starters in a sort of gamified way, perhaps, to help other teams continue the conversation. So I love that idea, Sarah, and definitely kudos to Scott's game as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, for the links to those, because it's all these connections and making them that makes this the whole event so valuable. I'm going to now move on, and we're moving on fast, and I'd love to sit and chat about what we've just heard for longer. And I think that's part of the networking too, is to do that. But now I'm going to, in the importance of time, move on and introduce our next speaker, Omid Ale, and who's going to tell us about an applied tool in meaning-based coaching. And I, just the name I find exciting and inspiring and so on. Omid's a coach, researcher, and public speaker, and works with the science of positive psychology in those areas, helping people thrive, helping organizations thrive. He's worked sort of everywhere, it looks like. So I'll let him introduce himself a bit more because it's, yeah, there's a lot there, and I could go on for a long time. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to share with us.
Good morning, Lucy, and good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here among all these great practitioners and professionals. And I met Sarah maybe 3 years ago. It was in Budapest, the last conference, and I'm glad to see you again here. May I share my screen, Lucy? Or sorry, could you see my screen? Okay. Well, the topic I'm gonna have a quick talk about it is about meaning-based coaching, which actually is part of the positive psychology coaching theme. And I'm gonna also introduce an applied tool, which is called the Success Circuit. I'm gonna start with a quick short quote from Rumi that once said, "You show your worth by what you seek." And when I dug more into that quote, it actually means you are what you seek. And that's the starting point for me as a quest of human for meaning. Paul Wang once studied the sources of meaning in our life, and his pure model showed that we have 7 different sources of meaning in our life. And on one of the toughest, most impactful is actually achievement. And that shows the importance of the coaching as one of the tools to find the meaning in our life. But we till now, we do not have any specific applied approach for the meaning as a positive psychology tool. When we look at the simple model of goal settings in our life, I found we usually have 3 main problems with them. First of all, sometimes we set goals, but we do not meet them. And we usually refer them as a lack of commitment or willpower or greed. But sometimes it's more than that. It might be lack of meaning or value or passion in our life. The second problem is that we meet our goals, but not necessarily in a healthy way. And for example, if we look at the PERMA model, we only gain A without the PERM or even way as vitality. So we call it a success at any cost. Or we may use our obsessive passion when we are looking for our goals. And that will guide us to a no meaningful experience in our life. So does meeting all my goal sets necessarily enhance my well-being? Or I'm just walking on a hedonic treadmill. And we see a lots of workaholic and successaholic outcome of this unhealthy way to achieve our goals. And it's interesting that if we look at the word of successaholic, unfortunately, it's using in a very positive way these days, that you need to be addicted to your success. The third problem with the simple model of goal setting is that we are not sure if our goals are aligned with our purposes in life. And our purpose in life is something that bigger than our goals. And by that, some study shows that we feel some isolation, alienation, or depression more and more. So the main question in meaning-based coaching is, what's my purpose in life? I start with a simple model of the meaning, which introduced by Martella and Steger in 2016, that they said the meaning has 3 meanings, basically. The first is the coherence and the sense of coherentability at one's life, that life is making sense. The second one is the purpose, the sense of core goals, aims and direction, and the significance. But we look at the Webster Dictionary, find that there are also some other meanings for meaning, which are intent, signify, and aim. And for that, I made another model with that. I put, instead of a triangle of meaning, a pyramid of meaning, which includes meaning, purpose, value, and intention all together. I just simplified the continuum model of the illness and wellness, not the dual model that Giselle has experienced. And with that, if we put the value as the part of the meaning, which is what that brings us from negative back to the baseline, after that, the purpose is something that will bring you to a higher and higher level of the well-being. The problem with finding purpose is that most of the time people try to find it outside themselves, and they look at the society and see where they are fit in. However, the purpose is something that is from inside, from your inner values, your intentions, and it's not something that your parents that tell you what to do, or something that the teachers that tell you that you're good at. When we are on purpose, we leave our being and our core self. So what's positive psychology coaching in general? Last year, a meta-analysis study by Van Zyl and Stander, uh, they reviewed more than 2,000 papers about positive psychology coaching, and they define it as a professional and collaborative relationship between a client and coach aimed to identifying, utilizing, optimizing, and developing strength to enhance positive state and behavior. The word of positive psychology coaching first time introduced by Robert Bisweiss mm, and his colleague in 2007. And during these days, most of the focus of the positive psychology coaching was on strength-based coaching. And the study shows that all those about 2,000 papers can introduce 5 steps of the positive psychology coaching that empowered people, starting from creating relationship, going to strengths, finding, developing ideal vision, goal setting, and concluding and recontracting. But by adding the meaning to that model, we can go deeper and add meaning, and the meaning and purpose as another outcome of such an approach with different tools, which one of them could be a success circuit model. So meaning-based coaching is an approach which rooted in unlocking. And unlocking, I mean by finding and both creating meaning in life. And when you pay attention to the key indicators of your life as a principle, you can name, work, and live on your purpose. But people need to have some adequate level of willingness and capacity for reflection. They call it meaning mindset by Paul Wang or some others. And also, you need to have a purpose mindset. And another principle is that being on purpose is a life skill which could be developed. It's not something that you have it or not. So we know there's lots of benefits to find and create meaning and purpose in your life. People who seek meaning beyond themselves are healthier, happier, and live longer, according to studies. And physically, they have a lower level of stress hormones, higher level of good HDL cholesterol, and less inflammation, better sleep, and happier mood, and overall a better sense of well-being. So it's vital for our well-being that we maintain a strong sense of purpose. As a simple model, we know that all of these components like values, passion, strengths, talents, and skills are main factors to achieve our goals. But how we can use them as a simple one model together. A success circuit is trying to integrate all those essential components. If you look from the left side, that are values, passion, strength, talent, skills, to our goals, it's a movement from the being, doing, to our having. So the very core idea of values are our main beings, and then passions, it's between me, being, and doing. Strengths are more doing, and then talents and skills are our halves. So as a simple steps of how we do that, we first start with finding the fields and the domains of our life that we're going to set some goals on it, but by asking some questions to the clients. And the next, we go to our values, and we try to find the core values and chosen values for the client. And we have a list of the database of values and interventions of how to find them. and we can ask some questions like what's important to you in your domain of your life, what's your purpose in that domain, and how do you enjoy doing that, and how you feel satisfied. For example, here are the list of chosen values by the client, like wisdom, openness, and peace. And then next we'll go to the passion, and passion is defined as what's very dear to your heart. There's also some interventions to find and develop the passions in the client. Then we go to the character strength, which is the most simplest one, and how we can find the character strengths through the VIA. And the strengths are what you are and how you shine in life. And next, we can use different types of test and assessment to find a talent like Gardner. And next, we will find the skills. The skills are sometimes the developed talents, sometimes that are something out of our talents. And then we can go through the talents, how to develop skills based on those. And that's the simple model of how we can make this circuit. And you can see some different lines. The red lines are those who are the most resistant circuit, we call it, because, for example, creativity is not one of the signature strength of this sample, or courage and optimism are not one of the most toppest values, core values of this sample. So then we can have make decision of how to critically use the signature strengths or the lower strengths, core values or chosen values to a successful path through the goals. And then we have a list of the observation during the week or a month of how different types of the strengths, talents, or values worked for the client. And an app is coming out to make an efficient and successful path of success through the different steps of the goal setting. And these are some outcomes after a few months, 3 or 6 months of different clients, that after looking all those values and the patterns of the strengths used and talents, they may tell you, for example, my purpose in life is to empower youth to excel in life, or I care about the people and environment. And I just try to make it short for 15 minutes. And if there's any question, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you for that. That's, you know, it's always amazing to see all these different thought pathways and models that feed in, and we've definitely had a lot around meaning in the last